A good friend of mine refused to play basketball with a female on his team. He stood his ground when stating that women are as capable to compete when compared to men, condensing his thoughts into the simple statement that it would just be unfair. This is not always an unpopular opinion in certain environments. Genetically, it can be conceived from the narrow idea that testosterone levels directly correlate with competitive nature, and that since men are testosterone-driven beasts, they will always have the advantage in competition. But physical and mental rivalry does not just exist in such obvious environments like sports. Competition exists both consciously and subconsciously in everyday life. It pumps through our veins, controls our actions, and helps us to distinguish our own self-worth in respect to other competitors. Nobody wants to settle for second or just go home with a participation award. And gender aside, we all want to be the best at something. But for some reason, competition and aggression are viewed as, more often than not, masculine traits, condemning femininity to a passive and apathetic standpoint from the realm of skill and athleticism. This is fully demonstrated through the wage gaps between professional male and female athletes. According to a study at Adelphi University, as of 2014, the average WNBA player makes about 1.6% of what the average NBA player makes, which is a downgrade of about $4.4 million. The media itself cannot be solely blamed for this inequality, as it provides attention and easy access to profitable organizations with a mindset that athletic females are lesser than male competitors. Audiences fail to develop interest and entertainment about female competition. This results in lack of attention and presentation, thus lowering the need to pay female athletes with higher sums of money. This roots in the idea of hegemonic masculinity, which Lind and Edson described in 2014 as a type of masculinity that communicates dominance and power, which, when behaviors challenge traditional expectations of femininity, can lead to alternative femininities. The authors also attribute the dissociation between hegemony and femininity to various scholars who assume that since this idea correlates with power, that femininities cannot be organized around it because women have limited institutionalized power relationships, thus coining the term emphasized femininity to illustrate the legitimate and commercialized form of feminine athletics. This receives substantially less attention when compared to hegemonic masculinity, emphasizing my objective for this presentation. By the end of this speech, I will convince you of the limitations pressed on the world of feminine competition that inhibit progression on our perspectives of gender. I will accomplish this by first establishing the main problems with general perspectives on female competition, second, crediting the roots of these issues, and lastly, offering some fair and simple solutions. It should be no surprise that there is unfair treatment of women in today's society. There are perspectives that limit their potentials, having ideas affect reality on a consistent basis. According to the American Association of University Women, as of 2016, there's about a 20% gap in income between males and females when women are paid about 80% of what men are paid. This issue, however, is even more apparent within the world of elite sports. The first main concern I'd like to address lies within the unfair general treatment upon female athletes in the competitive world. There is generally less media representation of feminine competition due to various economic and social reasons, and it creates huge limitations on the female perspective. Excellent media representation of male-based sports provide distinct associations between athleticism and men, while limiting the potential of female-driven rivalries. A lack of coverage on the female perspective of competition reduces both interest and accessibility to their stream sources, thus reducing their chances of exposure in the media. Take LeBron James, for instance, who is highly regarded as one of the best male athletes of all times, as he is given continuous opportunities to solidify his fame through highly televised performances, press conferences, and commercials. Cynthia Cooper-Dyke, on the other hand, is a 4-time WNBA champion, 2-time league MVP, and 3-time All-Star, who I actually had to look up online to discover. Highly skilled competitors within the WNBA are just not as easily exposed as NBA players due to their representation through the media. The injustices presented through females within competition do not just begin and end at their exposure, as this unequal interest affects the difference in players' wages as well. Adelphi University explains that as of 2014, on average, female golfers earn 16.6% of male income, top female soccer players make 14.4% of male counterpart wages, and the top female tennis player makes 54% of the top male players' earnings. The results are relative to the sport involved, but in nearly all situations, women make less. This can once again be rooted from the lack of support in feminine competition, as the question of why pay the less profitable organization creates the foundation of these inequalities. My second concern focuses on reinforcement of stereotypical gender performances through general perception of female athleticism, mainly the association that men are physical and female are emotional. Generally, women are wrongfully not perceived as aggressive or athletically motivated when compared to men, creating an implication that women are physically inferior. With this patriarchal implication being so apparent in the mainstream media and society, social expectations on how females and males act should become solidified, making it more difficult to challenge the norm. This can be perceived from both a male and female perspective, as men are expected to compete and women are encouraged to stray from physical environments. Nancy J. Finley clarifies this dissociation of femininity and passiveness in 2010 with a common idea that once feminized, people perceive the masculine content as another type of femininity, such as a bitch, a slut, or a badass girl. These descriptions offer the negative connotation expressed when women do not behave like women. Stereotypical gender performances can also create implications of inferiority towards women by limiting their sense of dominance. According to research provided by Judith Lorber in 1993, there comes the idea that sports are centered on speed, size, and strength, and women are naturally inferior through this conception of sports. With this generalization that women are substandard, men establish a sort of dominance in the fact that they are stronger, faster, and bigger. This should obviously be perceived as representation of inequality, as Lorber goes on to explain that neither sex nor gender are pure categories, in hopes of challenging the sexist conception that gender can reduce ability. The last issue I'd like to address relates to progression as a society, or lack thereof, when conforming to the idea of feminine inferiority in competition. This patriarchal sense of female limitations in athletic competence inhibits both the mental and physical development of males and females. Mentally, it enforces the outdated theories that men are superior and that women just cannot do as much. It roots from such a patriarchal ideology that women can be considered lesser, which should clearly be viewed as stagnation of moral development. There should not be a clear association with women in subordination, just as there should not be an association with men in dominance, because gender does not determine social position. From a more physical standpoint, limitations on female competition result in major influences solely stemming from the male perspective. This creates the idea that men do everything right, which restricts the potential of mankind by observing the abilities of only males. If there was a more solid stance on this patriarchal philosophy where women were not even given the chance to compete, then the major influence of Serena Williams would not even be known, whose competitiveness inspires young females to go against the grain. This is not to say that the general public is at a stable viewpoint of female activity, but that an increased limitation on their competence would yield significantly negative results. To eliminate these issues revolving around feminine competition, it is important to firmly deconstruct their origins, which can be done by first establishing their roots. The main causes of these limitations can be derived from patriarchal ideologies and media presentations. A major component involved in the dissociation between females and athletic rivalry is the outdated patriarchal ideology. This is best explained through alternative femininity, where the grain that females go against is this patriarchal philosophy. It is generally a social system where males dominate in politics, privilege, and society as a whole, thus deeming women as insignificant and substandard. This kind of belief in gender-based pedestals can be a leading cause toward negative connotations to female competence. Saeed Watto derived the conclusion through his 2009 research that feminist theory maintains that stronger patriarchal attitudes in a society are linked with higher levels of prevalence of male violence against women. This can be condensed to the perspective that males assume supremacy through patriarchy, believing that women do not have the means to dominate men, resulting in the ignorant conclusion that competition is a masculine-only characteristic. Isolating specific characteristics to identities is always a questionable assumption. Throughout time, it has been proven that any social system that bestows power onto certain groups while diminishing others is unethical. This is the main ideology behind concepts such as slavery and Nazism, And while social limitations on feminine competence is not nearly as severe as such, it is important to note their similarities and not repeat mistakes of history. The other main causation of competition being a solely masculine trait stems from the ways in which media presents athletic associations of men and women. The difference in availability between male and female sports organizations is abundantly clear, as associations like the WNBA and NSA are not nearly as popular as their male counterparts. It becomes more of a commitment to keep in the loop of female competition since it is not as popularized as male associations. And so audiences lose interest and merely follow the easily accessible sports teams that involve men. They will become more exposed to the characteristics of women that come from the male-driven sports broadcasts where they do not compete but simply report or watch. Nancy J. Finley again summarizes this concept in a 2010 piece on the issue where, if unconventional femininities occur in scenes that are disproportionately dominated by men, it may be hard to build alternative femininities that do not reproduce male dominance, such as an atmosphere where men are the competitors, not women. The lack of accessibility to watch and discover information about female organizations is also a crucial component in the popularization of alternative femininities, as the mass of society is not exposed to as many commercials and performances that normalize competitive female behavior. Because of the popularity with groups such as the NBA and MLB, television networks work well with making their games easily available, thus solidifying the idea that competition is fueled by male aggression. The University of Southern California determined in a 2014 study that LA-based network affiliates devoted only 3.2% of airtime to women's sports, down 5% from 1989. This perfectly illustrates how women-based organizations are not as clearly accessible, thus allowing a good deal of society's perspectives to divert from the association between females and competence. With the main roots of negative connotations to female competition now determined as patriarchal ideology and media representation, clear and simple solutions can be derived to alter society's unfair perspective. The limitations on femininity can be modified both through government and societal involvement. Government involvement in modifying these limitations on female competition is rather difficult to implement them. There cannot be a policy that eliminates unfair broadcasting between screen time of male and female-based organizations, as these choices are made through a financial perspective rather than one based on gender. While it may be tricky, the best method in resolving this issue would be to implement some sort of increase in women's sports coverage to around 15% through broadcasting policies. While I am not familiar with the legal processes involved in broadcasting regulations, this new policy could provide beneficial perspectives on gender diversity in the world of sports and ensuring it had at least some sort of solid base which it can be presented on. To change this perspective about female competition on a more societal level, certain day-to-day attitudes can be modified. Generally speaking, in order to change our world for the better, first the people have to change for the better. The best way to alter the stereotype of masculine-driven competition is simply to alter the stereotype of masculine-driven competition, whether it be explaining the natural equality between males and females within the world of sports to a friend, or simply not discriminating against a person's ability based on their gender. This does not involve any sort of law or policy that must be implemented, which could lead people to think that this is the simpler way to resolve the issue, when in fact it could be more difficult as the actions taken in this approach are completely driven by each person's morality. The path to gender equality may seem difficult and could be extensive, but surely if someone's moral code enlightens them to advocate change, then the goal must be worth working toward. Limitations on female competition are more apparent than most people believe in the world today, and it is this belief in alternative femininity that inhibits our progression on perspectives of gender. This has been analyzed by establishing the main concerns when the general analyzed by establishing the main concerns with a general perception of female competitiveness, addressing its causes, and offering reasonable solutions to resolve the proposed issue. Competitiveness is a natural tendency in all humans regardless of gender that motivates us for greatness. Whether it be conscious or subconscious, it has a strong effect on everyday actions and drives a large part of our ambitions. The ignorant belief that follows the patriarchal ideologies of men being more dominant and aggressive, thus better fit for any and all competitions, is outdated and misogynistic. It is also the reason that a good friend of mine got his ass kicked by a female competitor in a pickup game of basketball. Hopefully, after realizing the dominance the women held over him in the court, he will begin to help resolve the limitations pressed down on female competition.